I woke up Thursday morning to the sound of a diesel engine rumbling outside my bedroom window, which was unusual because my neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona, was typically quiet until at least 7. I rolled over to check my phone and saw it was barely 6 in the morning. The rumbling continued, accompanied by the unmistakable beep, beep, beep of a truck backing up. My stomach dropped as I threw off my covers and rushed to the window. My black Ford F-150 was being hoisted onto the back of a tow truck right there in my own driveway. I didn't waste another second. I grabbed the first pair of pants I could find, yanked them on, and sprinted down the stairs and out my front door in nothing but sweatpants and an undershirt, not even bothering with shoes. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted as I ran barefoot across my front lawn. "That's my truck." The tow truck driver, a scrawny guy in his 20s with a patchy beard, looked at me with an expression that suggested he dealt with angry homeowners every day. "Sorry, sir. We're just doing our job. HOA contracted us to remove this vehicle. Remove it. From my own driveway." I was standing right next to the truck now, watching my F-150 suspended at an angle. "This is private property. This is my house." A woman's voice cut through the morning air like nails on a chalkboard. "Mr. Fletcher Winters, your vehicle is in violation of HOA Regulation 14.7, subsection B." I turned to see Patricia Morrison, the president of our homeowners association, walking up my driveway with a clipboard clutched to her chest like it was the Constitution itself. Patricia was exactly what you'd picture when someone says HOA president. A woman in her late 40s with an asymmetrical blonde bob that looked like she'd asked specifically to speak to the hairstylist's manager, wearing a pantsuit at 6 in the morning like she was about to go close a business deal instead of harassing her neighbors. "Patricia, what regulation are you talking about? I park in my driveway every single day." She adjusted her reading glasses and consulted her clipboard with an expression of practiced superiority. "As of the emergency HOA board meeting held on Tuesday evening, all pickup trucks must be parked in garages, not driveways. They are considered work vehicles and create an unsightly appearance that diminishes property values." An emergency meeting on Tuesday. That was 2 days ago, and I never got any notice. The notice was posted on the community bulletin board and sent via email to all residents, Patricia said, her tone suggesting I was a child who hadn't done his homework. "I never got an email, and I don't check the bulletin board every single day. You can't just make up rules and enforce them 48 hours later. Besides, this is my driveway, my private property." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Actually, Mr. Winters, if you had read your HOA agreement when you purchased this property 3 years ago, you would know that all visible portions of your property, including driveways, fall under HOA jurisdiction regarding aesthetic guidelines." The tow truck driver had finished securing my truck and was climbing back into his cab. I turned to him again. "You can't do this. This is theft," he shrugged apologetically. "Take it up with the HOA, man. I'm just contracted to do the towing." "If you want your truck back, there's an impound lot on East McDowell Road." "How much is it going to cost me to get my own truck back from my own driveway?" "Towing fee is $250, storage is $75 per day, and the HOA fine needs to be paid before release." "That's another $500 for parking in my own driveway." My voice had risen to a shout. Patricia didn't even flinch. The fine structure was clearly outlined in the email notification. If you had complied immediately, you would have avoided this situation entirely. I watched helplessly as the tow truck pulled away from my house with my vehicle. My hands were shaking with anger. "This is insane, Patricia. You can't just tow someone's car from their own property without proper notice. I assure you, everything we've done is within our legal rights as outlined in the HOA covenant. Now, I suggest you park any future vehicles in your garage as required. Have a pleasant day, Mr. Winters. She turned on her heel and walked back down my driveway like she'd just completed a successful mission. I stood there on my front lawn, barefoot and furious, watching my truck disappear down the street. My neighbor, an older man named Carl who lived 2 houses down, was retrieving his newspaper and gave me a sympathetic wave. At least I wasn't the only one who thought this was crazy. Back inside my house, I immediately checked my email. I searched for anything from the HOA, checked my spam folder, searched by sender, by keyword, everything. There was absolutely nothing about any emergency meeting or new parking regulations. I took screenshots of my empty search results, noting the date and time stamps. If Patricia claimed she'd sent an email, I had proof that I'd never received it. I called into work and told them I'd be late, then threw on proper clothes and shoes. My job as a mechanical engineer at an aerospace company in Phoenix could wait. I needed to figure out how to get my truck back without paying over $800 for the privilege of having parked in my own driveway. First, I drove my wife's Honda Civic to the impound lot on East McDowell Road. The place looked exactly like you'd expect. A chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, a small office that had seen better days, and rows of vehicles in various states of distress. I found my truck easily enough, looking completely out of place among the cars that had actually been abandoned or involved in crimes. Inside the office, a woman with tired eyes sat behind bulletproof glass. "Help you?" "Yeah, my truck was towed from my driveway this morning." Black F-150, Arizona plate number. I rattled off the number. She typed into her computer with 2 fingers. "Okay, I got it here. That'll be $250 for the tow, $75 for today's storage, and it says here you need an HOA release form before we can let you take it." What's an HOA release form? Basically, your HOA has to sign off that you paid whatever fine they assessed and that you're allowed to have the vehicle back. We can't release it without that form. So I have to pay my HOA first, then come back here and pay you. That's what it says in the system. I resisted the urge to put my fist through the glass. This is ridiculous. That's my truck. It wasn't abandoned, it wasn't involved in a crime, it was legally parked on my own property. The woman gave me a look that said she'd heard variations of this complaint 1,000 times. "Sir, I don't make the rules. I just work here. If your HOA contracted the tow, you need to work it out with them." I left the impound lot feeling like I was trapped in some kind of bureaucratic nightmare. This couldn't be legal. There was no way an HOA could just tow someone's vehicle from their private property with less than 48 hours' notice about a brand new rule. My next stop was the Scottsdale Police Department. I walked into the station and asked to speak with an officer about filing a report. After a 20-minute wait, I was directed to a desk where a police officer in his 30s with a nameplate reading "Officer Martinez" gestured for me to sit. "What can I help you with today?" "I need to file a theft report. My vehicle was taken from my driveway this morning without my permission." Officer Martinez pulled out a form. "Okay, let's get the details. When did you notice the vehicle was missing?" "It wasn't missing. I watched it happen. My HOA hired a tow truck to take it right from my driveway at 6 this morning." His pen paused over the paper. "Your HOA authorized the tow. They claim they did, but I never received proper notice about any new parking rules. They had an emergency meeting on Tuesday and supposedly sent out an email that I never got. then towed my truck Thursday morning. That's less than 48 hours, and I never consented to any of this." Officer Martinez leaned back in his chair. "Sir, if your HOA authorized the tow, that's a civil matter, not a criminal one. You need to take it up with them or consult a lawyer." "But they took my property without permission. How is that not theft?" "Because you signed an HOA agreement when you bought your house that gave them certain authorities. Look, I understand it's frustrating, but the police can't get involved in HOA disputes unless there's evidence of actual criminal activity. Taking someone's vehicle without proper notice isn't criminal. Not if they have a contractual right to do it, which your HOA agreement probably gives them. Your best bet is to talk to a lawyer who specializes in HOA law. There are quite a few around here because this kind of thing happens more often than you'd think." I left the police station feeling even more frustrated than before. Everyone kept telling me to talk to someone else, but nobody wanted to actually help. I sat in the Civic in the parking lot and did a search on my phone for HOA attorneys in Scottsdale. Several names came up, but one had particularly good reviews. Robert Chen, who apparently specialized in HOA disputes and had a reputation for being aggressive in defending homeowners' rights. I called his office and was told he had an opening that afternoon at 2. I took it, then headed home to gather every document I could find related to my HOA. The original agreement from when I bought the house, every email I'd ever received from them, my bank statements showing HOA dues paid in full, everything. At 2 o'clock sharp, I was sitting in Robert Chen's office, a modern space in a Scottsdale high-rise with a view of Camelback Mountain. Robert himself was a man in his 40s with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said, pulling out a legal pad. I walked him through the entire morning, from waking up to the sound of the tow truck to Patricia's clipboard, and her claim about the emergency meeting and email notification. I showed him the screenshots proving I'd never received any email, and I handed him all my HOA documents. Robert listened carefully, occasionally taking notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and tapped his pen against his lips. "Okay, so here's the situation. Arizona law actually has pretty specific requirements about HOA rule changes and notification. Let me look at your governing documents first to see what your specific HOA's bylaws require." He spent several minutes reading through the paperwork, flipping between pages and highlighting certain sections. Finally, he looked up. "This is interesting. According to your HOA's own bylaws, any rule change requires a vote at a regular board meeting, not an emergency meeting. Emergency meetings are only supposed to be called for immediate threats to safety or property, and even then, they can't be used to implement new restrictions. Additionally, Arizona Revised Statute 33-1803 requires at least 48 hours notice for emergency meetings, and that notice must be posted in a prominent location, and if email addresses are on file, sent electronically. But even if they did send an email, which they didn't to me, enforcing a new rule 2 days later doesn't seem like enough time. It's not. Arizona law also requires that non-emergency rule changes must be provided to homeowners at least 30 days before enforcement. What your HOA did was possibly illegal on multiple levels. They may have violated their own bylaws and state law. For the first time all day, I felt a glimmer of hope. So what can I do? Well, first, we're going to draft a demand letter to your HOA stating that the tow was unauthorized and illegal, and demanding they immediately provide you with the release form for your vehicle and reimburse you for all towing and storage fees. We'll give them 48 hours to comply. And if they don't, then we file suit. But here's something else you might consider. What they did, taking your vehicle from your property without legal authority, could potentially be considered criminal. In Arizona, unlawfully taking or controlling someone's vehicle can be charged as theft, even if the intent was to return it eventually. The criminal code calls it unauthorized use of a vehicle. My eyes widened. You mean I could actually press charges? Potentially, yes. Now, the police already told you they consider it a civil matter, which is their standard response to HOA disputes. But if we can demonstrate that the HOA violated the law in how they implemented and enforced this rule, and that therefore they had no legal authority to tow your vehicle, then what they did was effectively unauthorized taking of your property. That's theft. Grand theft auto, I said, the phrase suddenly making sense in a way it never had before. Robert smiled slightly. Well, the technical charge would likely be unauthorized use of a vehicle, which is a Class 5 felony in Arizona if certain conditions are met. But yes, in layman's terms, you could potentially press criminal charges. Let's do it. Let's do all of it. The demand letter, and I want to file a proper criminal complaint. I have to warn you, the criminal route is going to be complicated. The county attorney's office doesn't usually prosecute HOA disputes, and you'll have to convince them that this rises to the level of criminal conduct. But if you're willing to fight it, I'm willing to help you. I'm willing. This is my home, my property. They can't just make up rules overnight and steal my truck. Robert nodded approvingly. Okay then. Let's start with the demand letter. I'll have it drafted and sent to your HOA by tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I want you to go back to the police station and file a formal complaint. Reference Arizona Revised Statute 13-1814, which covers unauthorized use of a vehicle. Insist that you want a report filed, even if they tell you it's a civil matter. The more documentation we have, the better. I left Robert's office feeling energized despite the horrible day. I had a plan now, a path forward, and more importantly, someone on my side who actually knew what he was talking about. The next morning, Friday, I returned to the police station. This time I asked specifically to speak with a supervisor. After another wait, I was directed to a sergeant's office. Sergeant Linda Powell was a woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and an expression that suggested she didn't have time for nonsense. Officer Martinez mentioned you were in yesterday about an HOA towing issue, she said as I sat down. Yes, madam. I've since consulted with an attorney, and he advised me that what the HOA did may constitute unauthorized use of a vehicle under Arizona Revised Statute 13-1814. I'd like to file a formal complaint. Sergeant Powell's eyebrows rose slightly. You consulted with an attorney? Yes, Robert Chen. He specializes in HOA law. She pulled up something on her computer and typed for a moment. Okay. Walk me through exactly what happened again, but this time I want every detail about the notification process and timeline. I went through the entire story again, this time with more specifics about dates and times. I showed her my phone with the screenshots of my empty email searches, explained the bylaw's requirement for 30-day notice on rule changes, and detailed how I'd never received any information about the emergency meeting. Sergeant Powell listened more carefully than Officer Martinez had. When I finished, she leaned back and considered. Here's the thing. Normally, yes, we consider HOA towing a civil matter because there's usually a contractual agreement that gives them that authority. But if they violated the proper procedures required by law to implement that authority, then they may have acted outside their legal rights. That could make it a criminal matter. So you'll take a report. I'll do better than that. I'm going to send an officer to talk to your HOA president and the towing company to get their side of the story. If what you're saying is accurate, and they can't produce proof that they followed proper notification procedures, then we may have grounds for charges. But I'm not going to lie to you, the county attorney's office might decline to prosecute. They're going to look at this and see an HOA dispute. I understand. I just want it on record that what they did was wrong. Give me until Monday. We'll investigate over the weekend, and I'll have an answer for you. I thanked her and left feeling cautiously optimistic. That afternoon, Robert called to tell me he'd sent the demand letter via email and certified mail to Patricia Morrison and the HOA board. The letter was 6 pages long and detailed every legal violation the HOA had committed, demanded immediate release of my vehicle with all fees waived, and threatened legal action if they didn't comply within 48 hours. I made it very clear, Robert said, that if they don't release your truck and reimburse you, we'll be filing suit for the towing costs, your attorney's fees, and damages for the violation of your rights. I also mentioned that you filed a criminal complaint with the police. How do you think they'll react? HOAs like yours tend to have one of two responses. They either back down immediately when confronted with actual legal consequences, or they double down out of pride and stubbornness. We'll find out which type yours is soon enough. The weekend was torture. My truck sat in an impound lot, racking up $75 a day in storage fees, while I waited to see if the HOA would respond to the demand letter, or if the police investigation would go anywhere. I spent Saturday researching Arizona HOA law and reading horror stories from other homeowners who dealt with overreaching associations. I found out that HOA abuse was surprisingly common, and that Arizona actually had fairly strong homeowner protection laws compared to some states, though enforcement was often lax. Sunday evening, I got an email. It was from Patricia Morrison, sent to my personal email address, which meant she'd always had it and could have sent me the original notification if she'd wanted to. The email was brief and cold. Mr. Winters, the HOA board has reviewed your attorney's letter and finds it without merit. The towing of your vehicle was conducted in full compliance with HOA regulations and Arizona law. The fine stands, and your vehicle will remain impounded until all fees are paid, and you provide proof that your garage has adequate space to store your pickup truck as required. Regards, Patricia Morrison, President, Desert Bloom Estates HOA. I forwarded the email to Robert immediately along with a message. I guess we know which type they are. Monday morning, Robert called me. I got your forward. Yeah, they're the stubborn type. I'm going to start drafting a lawsuit. We'll file in Maricopa County Superior Court and sue them for the immediate return of your vehicle, all fees, attorney costs, and punitive damages for bad faith. How much is your truck worth? I still owe about $30,000 on it. It's a 2023 model. Okay, and how many days has it been impounded now? This is day 4. So we're at $300 for storage plus the original towing fee of $250 plus their $500 fine. They're trying to extort over $1,000 from you for parking in your own driveway. Yeah, this is going to make a judge angry. What about the criminal side? I was just about to mention that. I got a call this morning from Sergeant Powell at Scottsdale PD. They interviewed Patricia Morrison and the tow truck driver over the weekend. Apparently, Patricia admitted that the email notification system had some kind of glitch, and several homeowners didn't receive the message. But she claims she posted notice on the community bulletin board, so that was sufficient. So she knew people didn't get the email and she towed my truck anyway. Exactly. And here's the better part. The The tow truck driver told police that Patricia specifically instructed him to tow your truck first before any other vehicles because you had, quote, been a problem for the HOA in the past, unquote. Have you had issues with them before? I thought back. I mean, I've gotten a few ridiculous notices over the years. One time they said my grass was a quarter-inch too tall. Another time they complained that my garbage cans were visible from the street for 20 minutes on a non-collection day because I'd been bringing them in from the curb. But I always complied with whatever they asked. I never fought anything until now. Well, apparently Patricia sees you as a troublemaker, and this was targeted at you specifically. Sergeant Powell says that gives them more grounds to pursue criminal charges because it shows intent and malice rather than just enforcement of rules. So, are they going to charge her? The case is being forwarded to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office for review. That could take a few weeks, but Sergeant Powell seemed to think they might actually take it. In the meantime, she's advised the impound lot that your vehicle was potentially taken illegally, and they're not to release it to anyone except you, and you don't need the HOA release form anymore. Wait, so I can get my truck back. You can get your truck back, but you'll still have to pay the impound fees for now. We'll recover those in the lawsuit. But yes, go get your truck today. I didn't need to be told twice. I drove straight to the impound lot, and this time when I walked into the office, the tired-looking woman behind the glass had a different attitude. Mr. Winters. Yeah, we got a call from Scottsdale PD. You're cleared to take your vehicle. That'll be $250 for the tow and $300 for 4 days storage, so $550 total. It killed me to hand over $550 for the privilege of getting my own truck back from my own driveway, but I paid it with my credit card and got a receipt that itemized every charge. Robert had told me to keep every single piece of paper related to this case. As I drove my truck out of the impound lot, I felt a savage satisfaction. Patricia Morrison had made a serious mistake by targeting me specifically, and now she was going to face actual consequences. That afternoon, I went to the community bulletin board that Patricia had claimed provided sufficient notice. It was located near the mailboxes at the front of the neighborhood, and I took probably 50 photos of it from every angle. The board was covered with old flyers for garage sales and lost pets, community event announcements from months ago, and general neighborhood information. I looked carefully through every single paper pinned to that board. There was nothing about an emergency meeting. Nothing about new parking regulations. Nothing. I took a video of myself slowly panning across every inch of the bulletin board, narrating the date and time, showing that there was no notice posted. Then I sent the video to Robert. He called me within an hour. She lied. She told the police she posted notice on the board, but there's nothing there. That's what I'm seeing. And even if she did post something Tuesday night after the meeting, how is anyone supposed to see a single piece of paper on a board that's covered with months of old junk? Plus, that's not 48 hours before enforcement on Thursday morning. This keeps getting better. I'm going to submit this to the police investigation. Lying to police during an investigation can be its own charge. Patricia is digging herself deeper. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated quickly. Robert filed the lawsuit against the Desert Bloom Estates HOA, Patricia Morrison personally, and the towing company for good measure. The lawsuit demanded return of all fees paid, attorney costs, and $50,000 in punitive damages for bad faith enforcement of regulations and targeted harassment. The local news somehow got wind of the story. I came home from work one evening to find a news van parked on my street and a reporter with a cameraman approaching my door. The reporter, A young woman named Jennifer Kowalski from a Phoenix NBC affiliate asked if I'd be willing to talk about my dispute with my HOA. I called Robert first. He said it was my decision, but publicity might help put pressure on the HOA to settle. I agreed to an interview. Jennifer's questions were straightforward, and I simply told the truth. The HOA had towed my truck from my own driveway with less than 2 days' notice about a rule I'd never been properly informed about. I'd had to pay over $500 to get my truck back, and I'd filed both a lawsuit and a criminal complaint because I believed what they did was theft. The story aired that night on the local news. By the next morning, it had been picked up by several local news websites and was getting shared on social media. Apparently, lots of people had HOA horror stories, and mine resonated. My phone started ringing with calls from other homeowners in Arizona who'd had similar experiences, local reporters wanting follow-up interviews, and even a few lawyers offering their services. More importantly, several other residents of Desert Bloom Estates contacted me. Turns out I wasn't the only one who'd been targeted. A guy named Marcus, who lived 3 streets over, had his motorcycle towed the same morning as my truck. A woman named Sharon had been fined $500 for having a vegetable garden in her backyard that was supposedly visible from the street, even though you'd need to stand on a ladder in her neighbor's yard to see it. Multiple people confirmed they'd never received the email about the parking rule change. Robert was ecstatic. "This is perfect. We can potentially turn this into a class action if enough people join. That changes the calculus entirely." The HOA's attorney finally reached out to Robert 3 weeks after the lawsuit was filed. They wanted to meet to discuss a settlement. Robert and I sat in a conference room at his office while he took the call on speakerphone. The HOA's lawyer, a man who identified himself as David Brenner, had the tired voice of someone who knew his clients had screwed up. "Mr. Chen, my clients are interested in resolving this matter without prolonged litigation." "I'm listening," Robert said. "They're willing to refund Mr. Winters the $550 in impound fees and waive the $500 fine." "That's it. That's your settlement offer. That's our opening position." Robert glanced at me. I shook my head. He continued, "David, let me be very clear about our position. Your clients violated Arizona state law regarding HOA rule implementation, violated their own bylaws, lied to police about posting public notice, specifically targeted my client as part of a personal vendetta, and have now been exposed in the media as running a rogue HOA that abuses homeowners. My client has spent thousands in attorney fees, lost time from work, and suffered significant stress. Your opening position is insulting." There was silence on the other end. "Then, what are you looking for?" "Full refund of all fees paid. $5,000 for my client's trouble and emotional distress. $20,000 in attorney fees, and Patricia Morrison's resignation as HOA president. Additionally, the HOA must implement new procedures ensuring proper notice for all rule changes and agree to third-party oversight for 1 year." "That's completely unreasonable." "Then we'll see you in court." And by the way, the county attorney's office is still reviewing criminal charges against Mrs. Morrison. I wonder how that will affect her home insurance and ability to serve on any boards in the future. Robert ended the call. I looked at him with raised eyebrows. "You really think we can get all that?" "Probably not all of it, but we're negotiating. You never accept the first position. They'll come back with something better or we go to trial. Either way, we're in a good position." 4 days later, David Brenner called again. The HOA was willing to refund all fees, pay $10,000 in attorney costs, and Patricia would step down as president but remain on the board. No money for emotional distress, no oversight. Robert countered. All fees refunded, $15,000 in attorney fees, $3,000 for emotional distress. Patricia removed from the board entirely, and 6 months of third-party oversight. They went back and forth for another week. Meanwhile, the criminal investigation was progressing. The Maricopa County Attorney's Office had assigned a prosecutor to review the case, an assistant county attorney named Michael Torres, who apparently had a reputation for taking on unusual cases. I got a call to come in and give a formal statement. I met with Michael Torres in his office at the county attorney's building in downtown Phoenix. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his early 30s, with an intense focus as he reviewed the case file. "Mr. Winters, I've read through all the police reports and supporting documentation. I want you to understand that this is not a typical case we'd prosecute. However, there are several factors that make this interesting from a criminal justice perspective. Such as, first, Mrs. Morrison's admission that she knew some homeowners didn't receive email notification, but proceeded with enforcement anyway. Second, the tow truck driver's statement that she specifically told him to target your vehicle first because you'd been, in her words, a problem. Third, her false statement to police about posting notice on the community bulletin board. And fourth, the fact that this appears to be part of a pattern of behavior targeting multiple homeowners. So you're going to file charges. I'm considering it. The charge would be unauthorized use of a vehicle under Arizona Revised Statute 13-1814. It's a Class 5 felony, which means if convicted, Mrs. Morrison could face probation or even jail time. More realistically, if we file and she's convicted, she'd probably get probation and community service. But it would be a felony on her record. What about the other board members? They voted for this at the emergency meeting. We don't have evidence they participated in the specific targeting or the false statements to police. Our case is strongest against Mrs. Morrison personally. However, if we do file charges, it will likely shake up the entire board. Typically, when an HOA president faces criminal charges for actions taken in that role, the whole board resigns to avoid liability. When will you decide? I need to run it by my supervisor, but probably within the next week. The fact that this has gotten media attention actually helps because it shows there's public interest in holding HOAs accountable. We've had a lot of complaints over the years about HOA overreach, but usually they're civil matters. This one crosses the line into criminal conduct. I left the meeting feeling like maybe, just maybe, justice was actually going to happen. It seemed impossible that a simple case of my truck being towed could result in criminal charges against an HOA president, but here we were. The following Tuesday, Robert called me with excitement in his voice. The HOA just caved. They're accepting our last offer. Full refund of fees, $15,000 in attorney costs, $3,000 for emotional distress. Patricia removed from the board and 6 months oversight. They want to settle before any criminal charges are filed. Wait, so Patricia is trying to make this go away before she gets arrested? Exactly. She knows the criminal case is coming and she's panicking. But here's the thing. The civil settlement doesn't affect the criminal prosecution. That's entirely separate. The county attorney doesn't have to drop charges just because we settled. So she could still be charged. She could still be charged. And honestly, I hope she is. What she did was wrong, and other HOAs need to see that there are consequences. 2 days later, I received a settlement check for $18,550, $550 in refunds, $15,000 in attorney fees, and $3,000 in emotional distress compensation. The settlement agreement also formally documented Patricia Morrison's removal from the HOA board and the appointment of an independent management company to oversee the HOA's operations for 6 months. I thought that might be the end of it, but the following Monday, I got a call from Michael Torres at the county attorney's office. "Mr. Winters, I wanted to let you know that we're filing charges against Patricia Morrison. 1 count of unauthorized use of a vehicle and 1 count of false reporting to law enforcement. The unauthorized use is a Class 5 felony, and the false reporting is a Class 1 misdemeanor." I felt a surge of vindication. When will she be arrested? "We're issuing a summons rather than an arrest warrant since she's not a flight risk, and these aren't violent crimes. She'll receive the summons in the next few days and will have to appear for arraignment. The case will be assigned to a judge, and then it will proceed through the normal criminal process. What are the chances she's actually convicted? Hard to say. She'll probably get a lawyer who'll try to argue this was a civil matter and that criminal charges are inappropriate. But we have her own statements to police, the evidence that she lied about posting notice, and the tow truck driver's testimony about her specifically targeting you. I think we have a solid case. At minimum, she'll probably take a plea deal." Over the next month, the criminal case played out. Patricia Morrison hired a defense attorney, a guy who'd apparently handled several white-collar crime cases. At the arraignment, she pleaded not guilty to both charges. The judge set a trial date for 3 months out, but encouraged both sides to negotiate a plea agreement. The local news continued to follow the story. It had become a symbol of HOA overreach and the question of whether HOAs could be held criminally accountable for their actions. I gave a few more interviews, always emphasizing that I just wanted HOAs to follow the law and treat homeowners fairly. Other homeowners in Desert Bloom estates started speaking up about their own experiences with Patricia Morrison and the board. It turned out this wasn't just about parking regulations. There was a whole pattern of aggressive enforcement, selective targeting of homeowners who'd complained, and rubber stamping of violations without proper notice or due process. The independent management company brought in to oversee the HOA found multiple violations of state law and the HOA's own governing documents. 2 months after charges were filed, Michael Torres called me again. "We've reached a plea agreement. Patricia Morrison is pleading guilty to 1 count of unauthorized use of a vehicle, reduced to a Class 6 felony, and the false reporting charge will be dismissed. She'll get 3 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and she's agreed to never serve on an HOA board again. A felony conviction, yes. It'll be on her record permanently, unless she applies for set-aside after completing probation, and even then it's not guaranteed. She'll also have to pay restitution for your impound fees, even though you already got that in the civil settlement. That money will go to the state's Victim Compensation Fund in your name. I honestly never thought it would go this far when I first called the police. Most people don't. But you were persistent, you documented everything, and you had a good attorney who knew how to make the criminal case. You did everything right. The plea hearing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon. I took time off work to attend. The courtroom was in a downtown Phoenix courthouse, a modern building with tight security. I sat in the gallery and watched as Patricia Morrison stood before the judge, looking significantly less confident than she had that morning in my driveway. The judge, an older man with gray hair and a stern expression, reviewed the plea agreement carefully. "Mrs. Morrison, you understand that by pleading guilty to unauthorized use of a vehicle, You're admitting that you took or controlled Mr. Winters' vehicle without authorization and without intent to permanently deprive him of it. Is that correct? Patricia's voice was quiet. Yes, Your Honor. And you understand this is a felony conviction that will remain on your record? Yes, Your Honor. Why did you do this, Mrs. Morrison? She hesitated. Her attorney whispered something to her. She cleared her throat. I believed I was enforcing HOA regulations, but I understand now that I didn't follow proper procedures, and I shouldn't have targeted Mr. Winters specifically. The judge nodded slowly. HOAs serve an important function in maintaining neighborhoods, but they are not above the law. You violated state law, you violated your own HOA's governing documents, and you violated the trust of the homeowners you were supposed to serve. I'm accepting this plea agreement, but I want to be clear. If you violate probation in any way, you could face jail time. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. The judge accepted the plea and sentenced Patricia to 3 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service at a local food bank, and ordered her to pay restitution. He also issued a stern warning that she was never to serve in any HOA leadership capacity again. As I left the courthouse, Jennifer Kowalski from the local news was waiting with her cameraman. Mr. Winters, how do you feel about the outcome? I thought about it for a moment. I feel like justice was served. I never wanted to ruin anyone's life. I just wanted to be treated fairly and have my property rights respected. What happened to me was wrong, and I'm glad the legal system recognized that. Hopefully, this sends a message to other HOAs that they need to follow the law and proper procedures. Do you have any advice for other homeowners dealing with HOA issues? Document everything. Keep every email, every notice, every receipt. Take photos and videos. Know your rights under your state's laws and your HOA's own governing documents. And if an HOA violates the law, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. Get a good lawyer if you need one. It's worth it. The story aired that evening and got picked up nationally. Apparently, HOA disputes were a hot topic across the country, and a case resulting in criminal charges was unusual enough to be newsworthy. I got messages from homeowners in Florida, California, Texas, and a dozen other states thanking me for standing up to an abusive HOA. Life gradually returned to normal after that. The independent management company running Desert Bloom Estates turned out to be much more reasonable than Patricia's board had been. They conducted a full review of all HOA regulations, eliminated several that were overly restrictive or not properly implemented, and established clear procedures for rule changes that included proper notice periods and homeowner input. The new board that was elected 3 months later included several people who'd been vocal about HOA reform. They adopted new bylaws that required at least 60 days' notice for any rule changes, mandatory homeowner meetings before implementing new restrictions, and an appeals process for disputed violations. It wasn't perfect, but it was a vast improvement. I kept my truck parked in my driveway. Nobody said a word about it. The ridiculous regulation about pickup trucks being stored in garages was repealed in the first meeting under the new management, along with several other overly restrictive rules. Marcus got his motorcycle back and was reimbursed for his fees as part of the settlement. Sharon's fine for the vegetable garden was rescinded, and the new board actually encouraged residents to plant gardens as part of a green neighborhood initiative. Several other homeowners who'd been targeted by Patricia's board received apologies and refunds of fines. 6 months after the plea hearing, I ran into Patricia Morrison at a Costco. I was pushing a cart loaded with groceries when I turned down an aisle and nearly collided with her. We both froze. She looked older than I remembered, more tired. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she spoke quietly. "I want you to know I'm sorry. I got carried away with the power of the position and I lost perspective. What I did was wrong. I hadn't expected an apology. Thank you for saying that. I've been doing my community service at the food bank. It's been humbling. I see people who are struggling with real problems, and it makes me realize how petty I was being about things like pickup trucks and driveways. We all make mistakes. The important thing is learning from them." She nodded and turned to walk away, then stopped. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you fought back. Someone needed to stop me. I just wish it hadn't taken criminal charges to make me see what I'd become." I watched her walk away, pushing her cart down the aisle, and I felt something unexpected: sympathy. She'd made serious mistakes and faced serious consequences, but at least she seemed to understand why. As I drove home that afternoon, my truck handling perfectly after its unwanted adventure to the impound lot, I reflected on everything that had happened. It had started with such a simple thing, parking in my own driveway. But it had spiraled into a lawsuit, criminal charges, media attention, and ultimately real change in how my neighborhood was governed. The whole experience taught me several important lessons. First, know your rights. If I hadn't researched Arizona HOA law and found a lawyer who specialized in it, I might have just paid the fees and accepted the situation. Second, documentation is everything. The screenshots showing I never received the email, the photos of the bulletin board, the receipts from the impound lot, all of it was crucial to building my case. Third, persistence matters. It would have been easier to give up at multiple points, but I kept pushing because I believed I was right. Most importantly, I learned that systems of power, even small ones like HOA boards, need accountability. Patricia Morrison wasn't an evil person, but she'd been given authority over her neighbors without adequate checks and balances, and that authority had corrupted her judgment. She'd started seeing homeowners as subjects to be controlled rather than neighbors to be served. The criminal conviction, which seemed extreme to some people when the story first broke, turned out to be appropriate. What Patricia had done wasn't just a civil contract dispute. She'd used her position to take someone's property without legal authority, specifically targeting them because she viewed them as a problem. That was an abuse of power that crossed the line into criminal conduct, and treating it as such sent an important message. A year after my truck was towed, I was elected to the HOA board myself. I ran on a platform of transparency, accountability, and treating homeowners like adults capable of making decisions about their own property within reasonable limits. I won easily, as did two other reform candidates. Our first act as a board was to commission a full audit of the HOA's finances, which revealed that, under Patricia's leadership, the HOA had been spending significantly more on enforcement and legal fees than on actual community improvements. We redirected that money toward things like playground equipment for the neighborhood park, better landscaping at the entrance, and a community garden that Sharon volunteered to manage. We also established an ombudsman position, a volunteer role filled by a retired attorney named Frank who lived in the neighborhood, whose job was to review any violation notices before they were sent out and ensure they complied with our governing documents and state law. It added an extra layer of accountability that prevented board members from going rogue. The story of my towed truck became something of a legend in Scottsdale HOA circles. I occasionally got contacted by other homeowners facing similar issues, and I always gave the same advice: know the law, document everything, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. Some battles are worth fighting, not just for your own sake, but for everyone who comes after you. My truck still sits in my driveway every night. It's just a vehicle, a tool I use for work and hauling stuff on weekends. But it also represents something more. The principle that your home should be your castle, within reason, and that no organization should have the power to take your property without following proper legal procedures. The last time I checked, Patricia Morrison had completed her probation successfully and had her case set aside, meaning the conviction was removed from her record. She'd moved to a different neighborhood, one without an HOA. I heard through the grapevine that she'd become an advocate for HOA reform, speaking at city council meetings about the need for stronger oversight and clearer laws protecting homeowner rights. There's an irony in that, but also a kind of redemption. She'd learned the hard way that power without accountability leads to abuse, and now she was trying to prevent others from making the same mistakes she had. As for me, I still live in Desert Bloom Estates. The neighborhood is actually pretty nice now that we have a reasonable board focused on building community rather than enforcing arbitrary rules. We have quarterly neighborhood barbecues, a yearly yard sale, and a Facebook group where people actually help each other instead of reporting violations. My driveway, the site of that early morning confrontation that started everything, now sees regular traffic. Neighbors park there when they come over for dinner. Delivery trucks use it when dropping off packages. Kids ride their bikes through it on their way to the park. It's just a driveway, exactly as it should be. Sometimes I think about that Thursday morning when I ran outside barefoot to watch my truck being towed, and how angry and helpless I felt. I think about Patricia standing there with her clipboard, so sure of her authority and her righteousness. I think about the moment I decided to fight back instead of just paying the fine and moving on. That decision changed everything, not just for me but for everyone in my neighborhood and potentially for homeowners across Arizona who might benefit from the precedent that was set. It proved that even small acts of resistance against unjust authority can have ripples that extend far beyond the original incident. Grand Theft Auto. The phrase still makes me shake my head. I never imagined I'd be pressing charges that sounded like something out of a video game against my HOA president. But that's exactly what happened, and it turned out to be the right thing to do. Justice isn't always about sending people to jail or winning money in lawsuits, though those things can be part of it. Sometimes justice is about establishing principles, creating accountability, and making sure that the next person who parks their truck in their driveway doesn't have to go through what I went through. The whole experience made me more aware of local governance and the importance of participating in civic life, even at the neighborhood level. HOAs are essentially micro-governments, and like any government, they're only as good as the people who run them and the people who hold them accountable. I park my truck in my driveway every single night, and every time I do, I remember that this simple act was once considered a violation worth towing my vehicle over. It reminds me to never take for granted the rights we have, and to always be willing to stand up when those rights are violated. The story ends not with anger or bitterness, but with a functioning community that learned important lessons about power, accountability, and respect for individual property rights. Patricia Morrison paid for her mistakes, but she also learned from them. The neighborhood became better, and I got to keep parking my truck in my driveway. Sometimes the good guys actually do win, even in disputes with HOAs. You just have to be willing to fight for it.